Testing, 1, 2, 3. Oh, really? Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. I hope everybody has a bulletin. Jack's on the front, and let me just give you a little hint. I've already got his autograph, so when he becomes famous, I can sell it on eBay. So, who knows? So you might want to get him to sign your bulletin. It looks like a lawyer or a doctor's handwriting, by the way. I can't read it. But
a professor.
A professor, maybe.
History major.
Yeah, it looks like chicken scratched me. Okay, we're in Luke chapter 9. I'm going to try to cover 2 words this Sunday instead of 1 lesson. I thought that was funny. Okay, let's see. Verse 7 is where we're going to begin. The 12 have been sent out, we talked about, to preach the kingdom. They were given instructions, and several things from this particular paragraph was that Jesus is not only giving them a commission, but in the commission, he's teaching them to trust in him, because he says go out with no money bag and nothing else, that they're going to be totally dependent on God's providential care. I think that's kind of interesting, because it's not always that God in the first century performed miracles per se to support the apostles or whatever that they could do to support themselves and others, but he's using people in the communities where they went. So if someone said, yeah, come and stay with us, all of that I think is involved in God's providential care of his people. And I think that's true even today. Yes?
Now, the 22nd chapter, he sends them out and tells them to do the opposite.
Yeah.
Now, what's the contrast in those two?
Well, let's wait till we get there. Okay, can we do that? Because I haven't gone into that for this morning.
Well, I said, what you were saying, they were dependent upon him.
Yeah.
This time, so are they not dependent upon him?
No, I think they're learning the lesson to depend on him, but when they go out again, it's like you're taught to do something, then you go out and you do it. But even though they have what they have, they've learned that this is not what supports you. You see what I'm saying? I think it's like, how should I say it? I need to learn to trust in God, even though I have things that, have been given to me or things that I have. And so I think he's laying the groundwork of teaching them. And then later, they have the things, that they carry with them and all that. But he has taught them to rely on him.
Including the sword, by the
Yeah.
way, which is weird.
Yeah. So when we get to that, we'll go into that more deeply, if that's okay with you.
Hey, you know how it is, man.
I sure do, man. Okay, verse 17. Now Herod the Tetrarch heard about all that was happening, and he was perplexed, because it was said by some that John had been raised from the dead, by some that Elijah had appeared, and by others that one of the prophets of old had arisen. Herod said, John I beheaded, but who is this about whom I hear such things? And he sought to see him, which is kind of interesting. You're thinking about Herod here, who is a very hostile individual, particularly in regard of sustaining his position and some of the compromises he makes in his own personal life, and beheading a prophet of God, because of being aroused with lust and what somebody else requested, Yes. We're in chapter 9, verses 7 through 9 right now. But this right here, I think, is indication, and Herod is illustrating that the message of Jesus has gone out. You know, not only the apostles have been sent out, but there's been talk about Jesus all in the area, you know, throughout Palestine. Because you remember Jesus told the man who was possessed of the legion to go and tell, you know, what great things God has done for him. And so it's not that the discussion of Jesus or the gossip about him has been located in a certain region. It's gone out, just like, you know, people talking, and it begins to, you know, mushroom and spread throughout the land. So, but I think in regard to the structure of Luke, Luke is setting up the great confession of Jesus. What's Jesus? The great confession of Peter. What's Peter going to say about Jesus? That he's the Christ, all right, Son of the living God, as Matthew has it. The event is a little bit shortened in Luke, but it's elevated in the sense that we give it, it's kind of being served up. You know, who is this one is the question. And then we leave that and we go to the feeding of the 5,000. So I think structurally what we have is a question. Who is this person that everybody's talking about? And so you go to the feeding of the 5,000, and then you get to Peter's confession. The feeding of the 5,000 was a very significant event. David has mentioned earlier that all the Gospels record the feeding of the 5,000. And it was a pivotal event in the ministry of Jesus. And hopefully we'll get and look at the details surrounding it as to how Luke is recording it and wants us to understand. But that's the question. He says, who's this person that I hear such things? So that's the question being asked in the narrative that Luke's presenting about Jesus. So he gives you a picture of a miracle. That's a picture of who Jesus is. Then we get a confession of who Jesus is. So this is where we go into the feeding of the 5,000. 10, on their return, who's their return? The 12 apostles who were sent out previously. On their return, the apostles told him all that they had done. And he took them and withdrew apart to a town called Bethsaida. But when the crowds learned it, they followed him and welcomed them and spoke to them of the kingdom of God and cured those who had need of healing. Notice the two things that always seem to go hand in hand. The teaching, the preaching, proclamation, declaration of the kingdom of God, you know, the oral teaching that's going on. And then accompanying with that, a demonstration of God's compassion in a physical sense. So we're looking at both a spiritual, I think, in a physical sense of what the gospel does. And that's natural. You know, isn't it most of the hospitals are there because of religious groups who, you know, believe in God, because they understand that a part of Christianity is what? The compassion and the mercy and the physical well-being of people, as well as the spiritual well-being. So you always find those two things going hand in hand. So that's another illustration of that. So, verse 12, now the day began to wear away, and the 12 came and said, send the crowd away to go into the surrounding villages and countryside to find lodging and get provisions, for we are here in a desolate place. Now, this is very insightful to me. You have to keep in mind that Jesus is who? The Son of God, right? Jesus is aware of all these things, don't you think? And I don't think it's like he's lost in his own work and ministry, and he has no thoughts about what people are going through or what they're feeling or what time it is, and so the apostles, being the practical people that they are, say it's time. They know that, you know, unless they send them away, they're not going to have time to go and buy things. Things are going to be closed. And so they're being very, you know, I'd use the word pragmatic, practical. I mean, we wouldn't fault them for that. I mean, wouldn't that be what you would do too? If you were there and it's getting late, they're showing, I think, by their request, hey, we got to send these people away. They need to go home. They're compassionate about it. You know, it's the same thing that you do when it's over an hour and I'm preaching, you know. You know, you're being compassionate, I know, for folks because, you know, the mind, what is it? The mind can handle, the seat can, that the seat can endure. Is that it? Okay. But we have the practical side that's going to be illustrated and come side by side with a spiritual reality that we often don't take into consideration that actually is greater than our perception of physical things. It goes back, if you remember, to Luke 4 in the first temptation. Man does not live by bread alone, but from every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. So we have another illustration that's pressing that idea. So send the crowd away to the countryside that they can find lodging and get provisions. But he said to them, you give them something to eat. You give them something to eat. How would you have reacted to that? What?
That's a good question. After we feed 5,000 people?
Yeah. Maybe I'd have turned around and looked at Hester and go, man, this guy's crazy, isn't he? You know, he doesn't know. I mean, they have seen him do what already? What has he done already? He's raised the dead. He's done what? Walked on water. He has cured people of diseases, right? So what's so hard about this? Well, it's a different area. It's almost as if we come to faith and understanding in a certain area, but we need to grow also in another area, right? It's kind of like it has to be repeated. We have to grow in our understanding, and I think this is one of the things that when John chapter 2 says that the disciples then believed on him after he turned water to wine, it's not that they didn't believe prior to this, it's they grew in belief. Yes?
You know, it says in the text you're going to see 5,000 men.
Yeah.
That's not counting the women.
Yeah.
And possibly children.
Children. Yeah.
So you could possibly have...
You could have it double or, you know, more than that.
people.
Yeah. A lot of people.
I think what they're trying to teach is that we as human beings, when we believe something, we put conditions on it. We frame it in a certain situation based on where we are and what's going on. And they're learning that Jesus is unconditional, but they're not there yet. They've seen enough to know that there's the things that he can do, but they were like, you know, 5,000 people, what am I supposed to do? The logistics of it, they couldn't wrap their head around it and believe that he could do that.
Yeah.
I think that he's getting them to the point where they understand that it's unconditional at everything that he can do.
Well, it's like the title of the famous book, you know, Is Your God Too Small? You know, we do have these limiting. We limit God. They have limited him. Of course, they're not thinking about what they've learned. In this situation, poses a different, you know, set of circumstances, and that's the framework in which they reason and think. No different than us, right? Sure, we could see God working this, we've got confidence in that, and if that situation ever occurs, you know, maybe we'll respond in faith. But as I know about human beings, sometimes we don't learn from that situation, or maybe we do, but we encounter something that's not the same as that. And now we're extrapolating our reasoning from that environment that we have no knowledge or experience of or whatever, and we limit God, you know. Yes?
It's nice to, I think this is a human condition. We can't. They can't. And Jesus is plainly pointing out to them that they cannot do this.
Exactly.
By themselves. They cannot.
So what is he teaching them? What do you think the response Jesus wanted them to have when he said, you give them something to eat?
Rely on him.
Yeah. Did that cross their mind? No, it didn't even cross their mind, did it? I mean, if he raised the dead, he's excised demons, he's done all these things, why wouldn't it then lead to a response? Well, okay, what do you want us to do? How can we prepare, for this? Or, all right, I don't know. They're not responding out of faith. Not that they don't have faith in Christ. They do. But see what he's doing and getting them to grow in this situation. This almost looks like, you think of all the people, and how are they going to feed them? Well, it's out of their possibility of doing so. But who's there? Jesus is.
Everything they said, everything that had been done before was kind of like one-on-one. And then they're looking at this, the 5,000, the magnitude of it, and the amount of people that's impacting versus what they've seen him do previously.
Yeah, it's almost, yeah.
That's what we do as humans. We have a point of reference, and we fit it to that point of reference. But
Right.
they didn't have something to refer to on this, so they didn't think it was possible.
Right. It's like the centurion that says, no, you don't need to come, just say the word. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Adolescent psychology teaches that there are several layers of learning, and the most difficult of all is something called transfer of learning. That's exactly what we're talking about. Learning one thing and learning how to take that and transfer it to another place to understand this over here. Jesus is doing this with all them. He's raising their level of thinking from just a little logic over here to being able to transfer that learning to
Yeah.
all kinds of different situations.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes, Dallas.
But it's today. And we see this theme throughout the Bible. The Israelites in the wilderness have manna fall out of the sky, and they run out of water, and they're scared to death. The people are raised from the dead, but that was yesterday. Today we've got 15,000, let's just say, people staring us in the face that are hungry.
Yeah.
This is a new day, and we're forgetful, and we
Yeah.
forget how God provides and God takes care of us. We're just forgetful. I think that's a
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm doing preparation on the book of Hebrews because I'm teaching a doctoral class next semester when school starts again. And it's fascinating to me that the argument that the Hebrew writer uses is Israel's failure of capitalizing on their trust in God and being obedient. And so that's why he continues to use this theme. Today, if you hear his voice, do not rebel. Do not be like they did. So it's a daily trust, a daily obedience in the provisions, the providential care of God. And I think you're right. We often, today's today, and it's not yesterday. And so we never seem to transfer that learning to the current situation as it stands.
And I think it's important, and I think it's important for us as Christians today. Joshua told him to grab the stones out of the river, set those up as a reminder of what happened here. And we need to do that as Christians and remember the things that God has done. It's not necessarily setting up monuments. I'm not advocating that, but there are things that we can do to remember God's deliverance, God's provision, whatever that is, And I think baptism is an important part of that. We can look back on that day. Hey, that was the day that
supporting that big of a group. And here they have a crowd that's bigger than a
Yeah,
legion.
that could be somewhat
Maybe even double
threatening.
that size.
Yeah.
And how can we logistically handle all this? And they forget, going back to what everybody's been talking about, they forget what Jesus has done.
Yeah.
He can handle it.
Yeah. Yeah, so we do put conditions or maybe restrictions or limitations on God based upon what we perceive is the degree of crisis or situation or problem, right? I think that's naturally what we do as human beings. And what seems to be unnatural, which is what faith is calling them to do, okay, from a human point of view, surely Jesus wanted them to respond in a way that demonstrated their faith in him. God provides. God will provide.
Isn't this the same 12 that he just sent out?
Yeah.
And brought back?
Yeah, this is the same 12 he sent out, and next he's going to send out the 70 or 72. And, you know, they do things. They preach, they heal, you know. So they have an experience with the power of God's Spirit, right? But they're still wrapped up in this world thinking. And that's the hardest thing, is for us to have other world thinking, you know, Christ's mind, while we live out and, you know, the practical ways of life. So he says, give them something to eat. They said, we have no more than 5 loaves and 2 fish. So they're looking around. They see 5 loaves and 2 fish. Unless we go and buy food for all these people, for there were about 5,000 men. And he said to the disciples, have them sit down in groups of about 50. It's funny how, you know, they seem to obey this pretty quickly, but I wonder what the talk's going on. You know, right now, they may have caught on that our Lord is about to do something. So there doesn't seem to be, what are you talking about? You know, why? There seems to be compliance along that, because now they've come to understand that he's going to do something. But why didn't they ask him? That's what I think the text is trying to teach us, is to, our behavior as Christians should be somewhat different than the behavior of non-Christians, particularly during times of challenges, crises, death, whatever it might be. Shouldn't it? Because of what we understand. Not that we don't shed tears or have any emotional, you know, situation about it, but there is a different model, a different paradigm, a different way, a perspective of perceiving the world that we have that others don't, because of our faith in God. And this seems to be one of the greatest challenges for even those who believe to grasp.
It's too easy to despair.
Yeah, it is. That seems to be our default.
But the Lord your God has cut off the nations slain.
Okay. So unless we to go buy food for all these people, sit down in groups of about 50. And they said, and they did so, and had them all sit down. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up into heaven and said a blessing over them. Now, even Jesus is showing trust in whom? His Father, and praying and giving a blessing over this particular food that he has. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the crowd. And they all ate and were satisfied. This is interesting. There's always this emphasis on the people being full or satisfied. You know, it wasn't like it was scrappy eating. Like there was fighting going on. Hey, give me that tail of that fish. No, give me the head. You know, I want that rib. You know, there wasn't that kind of fighting over the food and people, you know, rushing to get the bread. It was like they all had their full, all of them, of what they needed and wanted. And so he satisfies all that. He broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the crowd. They all ate, were satisfied, and what was left over was picked up, 12 baskets of broken pieces. Now, is there a significance to the 12 baskets? What do you think? Huh?
God has
Yes?
solutions with everything.
Yeah, I think, the way that 12 is used all the time. What does 12 represent? David, don't say anything. What is 12? What does it usually represent? Think of it. 12 apostles. Huh? Tribes, the 12 tribes. I think from, and Dave, if I'm wrong about this, you can tell me privately. But I think 12 usually is understood as signifying organized religion. You have the Judaism, the 12 tribes, you have the 12 apostles, and in Book of Revelation, they're representing, the Jews and the Christians, representing faithfulness in religion in general.
Yep.
Okay. I took his class, so that's why I know these things. So if that's true, if that's what 12 signifies, that of religion, and not just religion. I'm talking about faith. It's what we're part of, the church, what they were a part of, and what Jesus is building. It represents kingdom. If that's true, then what's the message that 12 baskets full of pieces were gathered? What is the point of bringing that out? What's left over in 12
God
baskets?
will always give you more. I mean, it's a multitude. I mean, they needed this, but he proved that he's generous in his ability to give.
Okay, I think you're right. Turn to John 10, verse 10, I believe it is, and read that for me, Mark. Yes.
Malachi talks about God opening the windows of heaven.
Yeah, Malachi says, "Why are you holding back?"
God is not limited by anything.
Right.
But being a person that likes things organized, just to organize something this huge, with this much food, I think that 50 groups is showing that Jesus had a plan, and he organized it where his apostles could carry it out
Yeah.
in some organized manner. And it's without Sarge being there, they still accomplished it. It's fascinating to see that.
Well, I always wonder too how if he blessed the 5 loaves, and they're coming probably with baskets, and so what's Jesus doing? Is it constant the food being thrown in the basket, or is it just appears, but they keep coming back and going, this is a lot of people. And can you imagine, I think, the glee and the excitement of the apostles who are serving all these people. And you also wonder, are the people asking where this came from? How's everybody being fed?
One of the parallel passages, it says he had them all sit down. So that's
In the
even
green
more-
grass.
Yeah, and that's even more on the organization level.
Yeah.
you know.
Mark, do you have that passage, John 10, verse 10? Is that it?
John 10,
I think I'm thinking right.
the thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I've come that I may have life, that I may have, that they may have it more abundantly.
Yeah, I came that you may have life and have it what? More abundantly, which is parallel to what has been said about God not only gives us what we need, but he's kind of like, he gives us pressed down, shaken together, as we would use. And actually that comes from Luke. in his Sermon on the Plain. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting. So does that change your thinking about things? Isn't it the little rub is to believe it when you're not feeling it, you know, or you don't know. Isn't that the little rub, the little challenge is this is me, I'm experiencing this now. Now, will I have faith? And people will say that you're foolish, you know, but God has deemed the wisdom of man to be what? Foolishness. So it's always, I think, in a sense, faith is going to be unnatural because of sin in the world. I think it was a natural thing in the Garden of Eden, you know, because there was a fellowship with God. But since we're in a world of sin, then it appears or it seems unnatural to cast our cares, to trust. Yes?
I think sometimes when we pray and we ask God for things, you know, you're really just supposed to turn it over to the Lord and let Him have it and let Him give you the answer. But it's just human nature. We conditionally think, okay, this is what I want and this is what I think. And sometimes it's not immediate, and sometimes it's no, and sometimes you'll never know, and sometimes it's a long time before you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's hard for people to wrap their head around, to pray that way, to just leave it with the Lord and walk away from it.
Yeah, probably because of our own culture, because we're so into instant messaging, you know. It's funny, you know, I've been teaching at Faulkner for over 10 years now, and it's interesting how the students have changed in their demand for immediate response for stuff, you know, like in emails. We have a principle, you know, in regard to email messages, we at least have 24 hours to, it might be, I don't know if it's 24 or 48, you know, which is the policy. That 48 seems kind of long, right? But it's kind of like they email you, and then 2 seconds later they say, well, you know. And I'll always give them now my cell phone. If you want a quicker response, text me on my cell phone. And they use it because they're wanting quicker responses now. People are not patient as they used to be. So I don't know. It's just our own culture has some things it puts in our heads and that limit us in our understanding of what trust and patience is. Yes, who had their hand?
I'm sure there was probably some scribes, Pharisees sprinkled among this group.
Yeah, maybe.
There always was. But it's interesting that you don't hear there no more than you do on others that these miracles didn't happen. These miracles did happen without question.
There's never a denial that they happen. It's always either, well, it's Beelzebub, or, you know, that's one of the interesting things about the miracles of the Bible. There's always the people try to get around what they actually saw, or they try to destroy it. But that's one of the evidences of the authenticity of the New Testament.
Why do you think Luke doesn't record the reaction? That's what I feel like, just in I want to know what these jokers are thinking, you know? Does he, you know, because if I had performed this, which obviously I can't, but if I had, I'd want everybody to know, hey, do y'all realize what I just did? I had 5 loaves and 2 fish, and I fed every single one of you jokers out here, you know? And you're full. But it doesn't seem like,
That's
like
not the point.
Happened,
Yeah.
know? Except for 12 apostles each got a basket of bread left over, you know, or leftover.
So, to answer your question, I think it's answered in the transfiguration. You know, when Jesus goes to the mountain, he's transformed, and Peter, James, and John are there, And what does Peter say when he sees Elijah and Moses and Jesus talking together? Let us build 3 tabernacles, okay? And all of a sudden, everybody disappears. And Jesus is there alone, Luke says, and we'll see. And a voice comes out and says, this is my son, listen to him. So maybe that's the answer, is the focus is not on them and their reaction and their excitement, but it is to draw the reader to the source. It's Christ.
Do you think the people realize what happened?
Probably not. I wouldn't. Well, I don't know. You know, there had to be some talk. They probably went around talking about how all these people were fed by this religious leader. You know, we don't know how, but there had to be a lot of talking going on.
Reckon the fish was grilled, smoked, cooked, raw?
I don't know. You know, David, I wasn't going to bring that up, but I thought about that in my studying. Of course, you'd have to be living in that culture, right? So I don't know if it were cooked, or maybe they all cooked it themselves.
Maybe the Lord knew what they wanted.
Yeah. I mean, did they just, here's a fish, and I'm looking at a brim that I might catch, you know.
Did you see it in the movies, David?
So I don't know. I don't know, but evidently it was suitable for them to eat.
In John, I mean, the thing in John at the end.
Yeah,
where they're-
Jesus is cooking.
The men, you know, they were discussing among themselves
Yeah.
after they collected the food left over that surely this man's a prophet of God.
Yeah.
They were discussing amongst them. The other thing I thought was interesting in John is that he identifies the source where the loaves and the fish came from. And I think that people forget that God knew this was going to happen. Why did this little, this young man bring this to him, bring that amount of food with him by himself?
Yeah.
You know,
I always like to use this event in my leadership classes, because Jesus says, okay, you feed them. Give them something to eat. Well, they don't have anything, and then the young guy comes and says, well, I got, this right here. And what is that for so many people, they say. And so you got different kinds of attitudes. You got the person who's the budget guy, it says, there's no way. We don't have the money to provide or go buy. We got to send it away. So we're limited by that. When God says, I'll provide all sufficiency for you in the expanse of the gospel, does he not? Yeah, 2 Corinthians. And you have the person, who just has this small amount. Well, what can God do with a small amount? He can multiply. So it's, there's a lot of things to be said about this particular event. They were all satisfied, which is the result of anyone who engages with God by faith. Now, I think this is an example of the peace of God that surpasses all comprehension. What does it mean, satisfied? They were all content. What was left over, they picked up. God abundantly supplies. So you have this fantastic event that occurred that now leads to answering the question that Herod raised prior to this in Luke's presentation. Who is it? Who is this person that people are talking about? Well, we've been given insight now in the feeding of 5,000. Now we come to the confession of Peter. Now it happened that as he was praying alone, the disciples were with him, and he asked them, what do the crowds say that I am? See the reference there to the crowds? And they answered, John the Baptist, but others say Elijah, and others that one of the prophets of old has arisen. This is what they're talking about, Dallas, and others who have asked, are they talking about it? Well, yeah, they're probably turning, walking home and saying, this is the prophet? Is this it? Is it this person? What's going on? Who's Jesus? Who's the source of all this? Then he said to them, but who do you say that I am? See, it's not the important thing of what people are saying. It's where do you come down on this belief? See, this tells me about my faith. I have to have faith. It's not the coattails of some other person who has great faith that I'll ride into heaven on. It is as individual as every individual person. I've got to decide. He said, then he said to them, but who do you say that I am? And Peter answered, the Christ of God. Now, Matthew has a fuller extension of this because that's important to Matthew in his presentation, because he talks about building the church, the ecclesia of God. But here, the point remains that you are the Christ, you are the anointed of God, which probably goes back to Psalm 2 that Jews would have known, that talks about God's anointed one, his king that he anointed and established. And he strictly charged and commanded them to tell this to no one, saying, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests, the scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. So what does it mean when you come and you understand who Jesus is, who does all of these marvelous things? What's the ultimate conclusion? What's that? Praise him? Yeah. Well, what does it say about him? How is all of this achieved? Through death. His death, his sacrifice. Isn't it amazing that it seems like he can do everything he wants but change this plan of salvation? To change the plan of God, to alter it. No, it's in place. And so he immediately goes, who's this Christ? Yeah, he's the anointed one, but he's the suffering servant, the suffering redeemer. And that means that we too are to deny ourselves, as he will talk about beginning in verse 23. We've got a few minutes here. Let's go ahead. Any comments at this point? And he said to all, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. This comes right after in Luke's presentation and how he's putting these together as to what it means to confess that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. What does it mean to you? Ultimately, it means that I deny myself and take up my cross. And Luke is the one who has daily. Okay? He puts daily. The parallel accounts don't have daily. Just take up your cross and follow me. He says take it up daily and follow me. For whoever would save his life would lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. It's like a riddle, isn't it? Sometimes that's how truth is presented. It's kind of presented in paradoxes, particularly when you're trying to illustrate spiritual realities. I mean, what is there except a paradox when you compare spiritual and physical? We have to believe in the paradox. What seems unreasonable is the answer. Because we're flesh, the mind of the Spirit, the goal of God, and all that seems strange. That's why you always have Jesus saying, verily, verily. Listen up. Or he says, if anyone has ears, I wonder if he did that. If anyone has ears, he's talking, preaching to the people. Let him hear. Let him hear. Which goes back to the prophecy of Isaiah. What was said, that when Isaiah preaches, people will see but not perceive, hear and not understanding, lest they perceive with their eyes, they understand with their ears, and they come and I forgive them. See, that's the issue that's always involved, the paradox of faith. For whoever is ashamed, let me see, majesty. Whoever is ashamed of me and of my words, of him will the Son of Man be ashamed, when he comes in his glory and the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. Kind of takes you back to like 1 Thessalonians 4, when, the Lord shall descend, the holy angels and all that, trump sound. But I tell you truly, there are some standing here who will not taste death until what? You didn't say kingdom, because that's not to come till later, right? No, he said there are some people who are here who will not die, who'll see the kingdom come in power. So the kingdom was established in the first century. Okay. Since we're so rudely interrupted by people coming into our Bible class, we'll go ahead and quit for an hour.